I've had a few students ask me in the past why we have to spend so much time on the Constitution for a business law class. And the answer is really very simple. Any kind of law class centers around the law, and the law in the United States stems from the US Constitution. We're very privileged in this country, regardless of the problems that we may have or the disagreements we may be experiencing, to live in the United States. The Constitution affords the people unique opportunities and rights not found anywhere else in the world. And so it's important to understand where it comes from and why it's important. So I want to take just a couple of moments to go over some of the important facts. So the Constitution has everything for the foundation of the law in the United States. And it's important to also understand where it came from and how it was formed. Our founding fathers and the Pilgrims and the Puritans separated from Great Britain for very important reasons. The Pilgrims and the Puritans came to the United States specifically and primarily because they felt the need to pursue their religious freedoms. And this is important to understand, especially as a student of St. Mary of the Woods College that has our history grounded in religious freedom and rights as well. So they came here because they wanted to pursue what they felt was their purpose for their lives and what they saw as their worship and honoring God. And they could not do that freely in Great Britain. And so or I guess it would have been England at the time, right? So they left and they came here. And the founding fathers eventually separated from England because they wanted to pursue things that were best for the American people, which had very different needs than England. And so it's important to understand that all of our basic freedoms, especially from the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to a fair trial, all of those things stem from the Constitution. So it's important to understand its importance. There are a couple different kinds of powers you need to know and understand about the Constitution. Delegated powers are powers expressly given to the national government by the Constitution. So, for example, the federal government is the only government that can declare war. States cannot do that. But there are some shared powers that are held by both the national and the state government. A good example of this would be the power to tax. So you have both state and federal taxes. From a state perspective, it's important to understand the police power of the states. This is the power to regulate the general welfare, health, and safety and morals of the people. And basically, this is where most states gain the power for most of the laws that they create. So think about, for instance, education. Contrary to what a lot of people think, it is not the federal government's job to provide education for all. It's actually the responsibility of the states because it ties back to the general welfare, health, safety, and morals. So the police power of the states is really where the states get most of their power. You need to understand the conflicting theories of constitutional interpretation. The first is the bedrock view, which is a strict constructionist view, which believes that the purpose is to state the fundamental principles that don't change over time. In today's modern culture, that would be considered a conservative point of view. Then there's the living document view, and that's where the interpretation of the Constitution should change to reflect an evolving society. And in today's culture, that tends to be the liberal point of view. Because of these varying interpretations of the Constitution and the way the Constitution is being basically amended culturally, which we'll get to in a second, it's really important to understand when you're voting, for instance, if there is a Supreme Court seat available, that you need to understand what the view of that justice's interpretation of the Constitution is, because that will completely change the way they interpret the law. Amending the Constitution can be done three ways. The first is the constitutional method of amending. through Article 5. It's a very stringent process. It was done that way on purpose. The founding fathers didn't want it to be easy to change the Constitution because they wanted consistency. But they felt if it could make it through, if an amendment could make it through the Article 5 process, that it would probably be something that would be desired by most of the people. So that's the first method. The second method is the method that's utilized most often in modern culture, and that's through judicial interpretation. Again, going back to the Supreme Court. So the U.S. Supreme Court has interpreted situations not envisioned by its founders, and they set precedents all the time. And then the third is amendment by practice. Occasionally, the government departs from the requirements of the Constitution. One example of this would be George Washington and the fact that when he began entering into treaties, which is an executive power, entering into treaties, he asked for Congress's approval. That wasn't required by the Constitution, but that was an amendment that was really made by practice. And so most presidents after him have done that. Federal powers, one of the primary federal powers that you need to know and understand is the commerce power. Through the federal government becomes kind of like a general welfare power for the federal government. Because we are individual states that work together, obviously you would want to have a different currency, right? Having to maybe travel from Illinois to Pennsylvania. So there are certain things that the federal government regulates because of the close commerce or commercial ties that states have. You need to know and understand the financial powers. So federal financial powers include the taxing power and the spending power. So there is a federal budget. Again, for example, the taxing power is also a concurrent power because states can do that as well. You need to know and understand the importance of due process. Due process is the guarantee of protection against the loss of property or rights without the chance to be heard. This is a principle that's different in the United States and is really important to our fundamental concepts of freedom of speech and some of those other basic human right protections. Due process is very important. And then understand the privileges and immunities clause. This means that a person going into another state is entitled to make contracts, own property, and engage in business to the same extent as citizens of that state. So states cannot discriminate based on whether or not somebody lives in a state. And then also, of course, the Bill of Rights. There are 10. The Bill of Rights includes the protections of people not expressly written into the Constitution. And so those are personal rights. Really important to know and understand those. One thing I also wanted to mention briefly is the Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause basically states that when there's a conflict between a federal and a state law over the same topic, the federal government supersedes in conflicts. Why I think this is interesting today is when you think about that, when we think about some of the issues that are currently being discussed nationally, like, for instance, sanctuary cities, right, who are providing sanctuary for illegal immigration, regardless of how you feel about immigration. From a legal perspective, that's kind of interesting because federal law should supersede in any kind of conflicts. And so just the fact that those sanctuary cities exist is kind of an interesting phenomena, as well as, for instance, the topic of marijuana. So if something is illegal at a federal level or considered an illegal substance at a federal level, it's interesting that some states are changing their laws on whether or not it is legal or not. And of course, part of the discussion there today is really, is there enough money to enforce the laws that exist, or do we need to change the laws? But that's an interesting those are both interesting federal and state conflicts in law that are applicable today. So I hope those examples give you an idea of why it's important to understand the law. And you're going to understand as we go further into the material how to apply it in both a business and a personal setting. So I hope you found this helpful, and I will see you next time.